So welcome everyone to the latest Bulletproof Agency Network webinar, Built to Sell. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Barnes, Managing Director of MAP, and I work through the Bulletproof Agency Network with Steve Kunchevich of BLM Law and Mike Henderson of Riskbox. We've been running these webinars most months since the start of the pandemic, and we've always had a good turnout, so we will continue. But today we have a special episode where I'm going to pass the hosting role over to Stuart Brown. Stuart's my colleague at MAP. He's been involved in selling a number of businesses, including 2 agencies, one of which was earlier this year. And Stuart's going to be fielding the questions to me and James today. As I said, if there are any other questions that you want to add, just add them. We'll get through all of them either during the session or at the end. So without further ado, over to you, Stuart.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Obviously, thank you on behalf of the Bulletproof Agency Network for your time this morning. Hopefully we can make that worthwhile and we can learn some interesting stories and some different perspectives potentially from the co-founders of GoProposal, Mr. Paul Barnes, Mr. James Ashford. So welcome and good morning to you two also. Hey. I suppose I should start by saying congratulations. I should say what an exciting time it is, both obviously personally and for the businesses of GoProposal and Sage. So congratulations and well done.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you.
So I would start therefore with a question that says, very often we talk between ourselves and we talk with other people, and particularly lots of business owners that talk about their plans to sell or their desires to sell. And we know from our own experiences, and we know from a lot of the stats out there, that actually relatively few people actually do achieve that. So I suppose my first question really to you, James, is to ask you, before we understand this process and GoProposal, how do you feel now being sat this side of a successful transaction, and what is your role now?
Yeah, it's quite weird to explain how I feel, because I think in your mind you have this big vision of what it's actually going to feel like, and then you get there and you have the kind of the bang of it all happening, and then you're back to reality straight away of the kids still arguing, we still can't get a tiler to sort the bathrooms out. Like, just the reality of life just kicks back in very, very, very quickly. But I just always had this, I've always been kind of a curious person. I was the kid that kind of dismantled the radio when I was young, to kind of see how it worked. And then I became a magician because I wanted to learn how tricks worked and how to entertain other people. And then I became a product designer to understand how products work. So I've always been a very curious person, and I've always been fascinated in business. And I've just always had these questions in my head, Stuart, and you know this because we've spoken a lot about this, but first and foremost, how do you build a profitable business? How do you build a business that has genuine impact and creates value in the world, makes a difference in the world? How do you then back yourself out of that business and get it to run without you, so put the systems in place so it all operates without you? And then how do you get it to a point where it is, generated such value that other companies covet that value and that thing that you've created, which is a product in its own right, to the extent where they want to pay money for it? And these have just always been curious questions that I've had. Can I do this? How do I achieve this? How do I build this? And I think it's actually been curiosity throughout this entire process that's got me to the point where I've actually been able to create a business to be able to sell it. So it was a personal achievement, really. And it was, I think, on this journey, and you'll have experienced it on your journeys as well, Stuart, I've encountered many doubters, many people who said, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, you got a business that's failed, you'll never be able to build a business, all this stuff. And the biggest thing I got from this entire process was in my head, just thinking, see, I knew what I was talking about. And that was it. That was like my biggest personal achievement from this entire process.
It's fascinating, that, James. It also, I mean, we can talk later about having a business that is sellable is one thing, or saleable, and then also being ready and willing and capable to sell, emotion, everything else we can talk about. But I also think it's interesting for a lot of people potentially on the call, this may not be their first business. It may be their first business. It may be, serial entrepreneurs, people around. But I don't think, I think it's a very British thing that we seem to be concerned if your first venture didn't work out. I've been honest to that before. I mean, the reason I ended up being able to get businesses that were successful and sell, and as you say, as the founder, you think your business is great, you think what your product is great, but it's actually finding the person who, in some cases, wants it more than you to make it a really, coin the phrase win-win transaction, but you get my point. And I do think that having, the very first business I started failed. And that's where you learn the disciplines of the structure and the disciplines of the financial process, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And all those things that get you through that point. And also maybe help you distance yourself a little bit and distance. And I've met some brilliant founders who've got fantastic businesses that I don't believe they'll ever realize the value from because they're actually scared to let go.
Yeah.
And anyway, we digress. Paul, so you started this, where are we now? 5 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
So did you think you'd be sitting here today with this? And what's your role now with this? I appreciate your role previously was slightly different with James and yourself in GoProposal, but where do you sit with this now?
So yeah, just to clarify that first of all, I'm completely out from day one. So James and myself were the founders, we were the shareholders, and we were the directors of the limited company, GoProposal Limited. And as of the 30th of September this year, both of us resigned as our registered director roles. James continues in his role as the CEO of the company, who they like to call it vice president when it's a big company. So he's now the vice president of the company, which means it's the same as he was before, but a grander title. And I basically, my involvement in GoProposal over the years was able to become more and more non-executive. So initially when we started, it was all hands on pump, and I was effectively running two businesses at the same time with Matt. But over time, because of the systems and processes that we put in place, James was able to grow the business without my input largely. So my input became more non-executive in the board meetings once a month and regular conversations with James. And then James was able to gradually over time become less and less involved in the business himself as well. So I'm not involved anymore, other than we use GoProposal as a product for the accountancy firm MAP. And James continues in his role. So if I'm completely honest, we talk about built to sell, but as you said, Stuart, there's a difference between building business that's saleable and actually believing that in 5 years, we're about to sell this business to a FTSE 100 company. That was beyond what we could have dreamed of at the time. GoProposal was born out of a need for MAP. I met James, as a chance event. Gareth, who's on the call today, ran mastermind events, and James and myself met there. I showed him the way that we were doing pricing and proposals in the accountancy firm. James had done something in another industry, so he'd built technology to do that more technologically savvy than I was doing it, and more pretty than I was doing it, better branded, better designed. And he said, I think I could really, help to make this a better experience for your clients within MAP. So the first couple of months, we had no intention of GoProposal being a business. James was just acting as consultant and building some technology for MAP. And then once we got going through it, we got more and more excited about the opportunity and what we could do. And then we started to license it to other accountancy firms. But I think the difference from a lot of other businesses, we did get the governance right from day one. We didn't just start having accountancy firms paying MAP a license for some technology it's got. We didn't. We set up GoProposal Limited, or Leading Firms Limited, as it was called at the time. We changed the name. And we got all the infrastructure right from day one. We got the accounting right. We got the banking right. We got the legal entity structure right. We got the shareholding right. We got the shareholders agreement and the articles, so that me and James are very clear about what we wanted and make sure that we're set up right from the start. And we worked incredibly hard, and James in particular worked very hard to build a product that would make a difference in an industry. But yeah, did we think that we wanted a business that was scalable and that could make the most of James had done lots of different things in lots of different sectors. And I thought if I could help him to get focused on one sector, with the talents and knowledge that he's got, we could build something really special, build something scalable, and use the right balance of systems and processes and people from day one, and the right governance from day one. But did I think we'd be privileged enough to sell to such an impressive company like Sage at this stage now?
Okay, interesting. So, I mean, it really started off as a process then, more than a product. So it started off as a process that you're developing for yourself as a user, and then developed it into the product that, you know, is as you say, has been scalable. And I know James has worked hard on, you know, I think we used to have many arguments about expanding features every 5 minutes. So I suppose coming back to you then, James, on that, and I didn't know exactly the full history of how it started. So you said earlier about it was almost verification of saying, you know what, I can do this, and I will make this work from something. So we've just understood, Paul's just explained what the catalyst for the idea was, but what made you believe that you would take it from what essentially there was by the sound of it, an internal process and maybe an advantage for MAP at the time, to being a business that, you know, has now been acquired, as Paul said, by a FTSE 100 company just a few years later?
Yeah, I'm gonna challenge Paul slightly on what he said about being built to sell. So I'm gonna come back to him on that one. But no, so I've been working at a business prior to this one, a marketing agency, and encountered the challenge of how do you sit with a client and actually sell your services. It was born out of a genuine issue. And then I met several businesses in different industries, and every time this seemed to be like the major problem. How do we manage the fee, and how do we manage the scope of work effectively? So there was a plasterer, and then a landscape designer, and then a waste management broker. And every time it had this big effect when we dropped this kind of the print. It wasn't GoProposal, but it was the principles of GoProposal. So when I met Paul, it was like, yeah, I've done this. I know how this works. So let me just drop this in, and it works. But 100% at that time, there wasn't the concept of, are we building something here to sell? Absolutely not. It was, how do we fundamentally solve a problem in a huge way? And it was only when another accounting firm heard about us that was the spark. But the moment the spark happened, Stuart, that was when I thought, I am building this business to sell as an option.
Yes.
So people talk about exit strategies, and you know, we've talked about this at length, but to my mind, it's about option strategies. How do you give yourself as many options as possible? And how do you get to that point where you have those options as fast as possible as well? Because there's no point in thinking, oh, we'd like to sell one day in 5 years' time, and then you are working towards a point in 5 years' time when you're able to sell, because then all of a sudden something happens in your personal life in a year's time or 2 years' time, and you have to sell or something like that. So you want to get to the point where you have as many options as possible, whether that's to scale it, to franchise it into different sectors, to be able to back out of it and let it run without you and go and set up another business, to be able to sell it to a private investor, to sell it to your competition, to sell it to, you know, a large PLC. All these different things require different elements. And from day dot, once I realized this was what we were doing, I remember I did the logo and I wrote underneath it, you know, GoProposal buy. And then I kind of put in all the possible scenarios in my head of who this could be. That was before we'd sold the first. So just as we're developing the brand, in my head, I was thinking, this could be bought by someone. What do we need to put in place, you know, to be able to do that?
Can I just interesting you say that, because that will answer a question that's just been answered. Answer a question that's just been asked that says, if you were not expecting to sell to a FTSE 100 company, but if your end goal was an exit, what's your thoughts on, and I think we know this by what you've just said, and we have a similar view on what we call options. An exit doesn't always mean literally that. And John's asking the question that says, do you think it's sensible to look at those options early on and almost even, you know, write a list like you've done there, GoProposal, buy, option 1, option 2, option 3. Is that an intelligent thing to do, or is it risky?
No, 100% intelligent thing to do. I think it's very good for your mindset. You've got to believe that you're going to go there as an option. And the other thing, Stuart, it forces you to then develop those partnerships. So every single potential buyer, when we got to the point of identifying all the potential buyers, when we got into the actual sales process and engaged an M&A company, I would say that 80% of the buyers on the list, we'd already forged strong relationships with. We knew people personally in those companies. And this is intentional. We'd had intentional partnerships with them because there were routes to market as well, because they had a similar client base to ours. So there were potential routes to market. I'd spoken at their events, done joint webinars with them, developed integrations with their products, etc. So now everyone that we had integrations with and I had spoken at events of were on that list. So I think it's important to think about that.
Just coming back to John's question, I think what would be risky is if you said a buyer. So if you had identified one buyer early on and you're putting all your eggs in that basket, then obviously that is hugely risky. Like the chances of everything aligning at the same time as when you want to sell, they want to buy a business like yours, the right price, the right terms, that would be too risky. What we did is we had, as I've just checked your word in there, John, you did say buyers, exactly that. So what do the likely buyers look like? And for us, it was businesses that are in the accounting software industry and that might see GoProposal as an add-on for their other software. So we had a list of buyers that all fit within that criteria, and we've built alliances, relationships, integrations with multiple businesses that all could be potential future buyers for GoProposal, and one of them was.
Yeah. Okay. Can I add to that, Stuart? So just one little point to that. 100%, Paul. But you know what? The one of the major options that we had and it's so important to cling on to this card, is the fact that our main option was we continue to grow and scale it. Like, we were a profitable business. We never took any investment. After I think month 4, Paul, or between month 4 and month 6, we broke even and moved into profit. We kept it very lean. We kept features out. We said no to so many things. We developed innovative ways to market our business. I wrote a book. We produced videos. We didn't attend events because I can produce more videos and have 24/7 content. So we kept very lean because our primary focus was that we're growing and scaling this business. And when we explore this process of, is now the right time to sell? When you enter that process, if you enter it because you have to sell, people talk about, is it burning runways or whatever, that that they have to now do something. You're in a very weak position. So we wanted to make sure that as and if and when we got to that point of selling, we were in the strongest position we could. And right up until the last minute, I remember up until the point of signing, the lawyer, or maybe the M&A, it might have been Jim or someone, said to me, "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" Even at the last minute of the wire we're about to sign, are you 100% sure this is the right thing? Because even at that point, we still didn't have to. And that was very important that we had that as our option that we're clinging to, Stuart.
It's fascinating that. And I think I've said previously that my very, very first involvement in the sales process, that exactly happened. We went through all the due diligence, everything was ready. And actually the majority shareholder sat there at completion and said, if I sign this, what am I tomorrow and who am I tomorrow? Which is where, as I say, the readiness to sell comes from. So James has spoken there about, we were clear about scaling it and we got to profit quite quickly. And that may be easier with a finance professional in the business. So I'm going to turn to Paul as the accountant on the call here. I know there's plenty of accountants on the call, and the panelists, I should say. So from the sort of the role there of I essentially was, either like an FD or an outsourced FD to GoProposal at that point in time. When did you see that you were building something special? And when did you see that you were building something scalable that then would support the ambition that James had for the business?
It all shows up in the numbers at the end of the day, doesn't it? Obviously, James is a very energetic personality who could sell ice to the Eskimos. So I wanted to make sure that, I was there as that sort of voice of reason, and I was actually seeing the rubber hit the road, and people signing up for subscriptions. And that started happening at a very early stage. As James says, there's lots of technology businesses that take months or years to get to the point of generating revenue. And we were doing it almost from day one because we had the bravery to say that we've got something that's good enough that's going to add value to businesses. We didn't need it to be the perfect polished article. James compares it to like the iPhone analogy. If they had waited until it's got the spec it's got today, they'd have missed, I don't know how long the iPhone's been going, about 15 years, hasn't it? They'd have missed 15 years and 13 versions of iPhones to get to the phone that they got today. And all that revenue and experience that they built over the years and product development they built over the years. With us, it was very quickly, it was on the shelf, ready for people to buy. And we'd probably wince if we look back at the software that existed 4.5 years ago, but our clients wouldn't. It was a good product that made a difference to their businesses at the time, and they bought into James's vision for how they wanted it to develop, and he listened and he spoke to customers all the time. But that doesn't mean that he just bowed down to them for every single request. He listened to what the consensus was, and if he didn't believe in what they were asking for, he wouldn't do it. And if he did, he would do it really quickly. So we were able to develop the product to a point of being valuable and generating license fees at a very early stage. And when I saw that coming through, I realized that if we're doing this already now, imagine what we can do once we've actually built the products that we're capable of building.
I also think there's, lessons in your own experience previously. So James spoke earlier about the fact that, or in your introduction, to say, he was a product designer. And the thing that I always found very interesting in the early days of this business was James's passion about, I want so V1's better than V0, I think was the phrase.
Version 1 is better than version none.
That's it. Used to say all the time. But also the fact that, I was an advocate then of, user experience, and I still am. I'm not saying that as I'm not, but it was an interesting view that James's view was, well, let's get people really using it. And, there's a lot of evidence now. If you're going to innovate, you're going to do a product, then just get it out there and work with it, and your early adopters will take it and you'll get some fantastic feedback. And I think that's a really valuable part of this story, that what in essence, what has been purchased today is, I wouldn't even know how many iterations you've gone through, but it's, as you said, Paul, very different to where you started. And yet you've had amazing loyalty and longevity with GoProposal members, which is also not the norm in a lot of and I'm going to, please, when I say app, James, don't scream at me because I know it's not an app, but in an app or a textile business, very often users are very quick to say, well, blue was so much last year, I'm going red this year, or whatever it is. So I think that's an interesting part as well. So at what point in this journey, James, did you sort of get the appetite to sell the business? I mean, you said up there about that you designed it, that you'd have these options, but then at some point, although you've said at the very last minute I could have not done it, when did you decide that if that was going to be the preferred outcome, what did it? Was it because you started to see, you had these partnerships there, you started to see interest? I remember you receiving interest 2 or 3 years ago, and that wasn't at the right time for you. So was it that suddenly the market was there and you thought, now's my time to do this? Yeah. Or was it a more personal, internal reason?
Yeah. So years ago, I'm just going to tell you 2 questions I asked that kind of drove this. So I've had so many, when I did a list the other week about being an overnight success, and my overnight started when I was 15 years old. So it's been a long night. And the number of attempts of business I've tried. And I remember when I was about 25, I was wanting to do various things, and I didn't have the options to do them. And I asked this question to myself: how do I remove the problem of money from my life? How do I solve the problem of money from my life and from my family's life, my children's life, so that they have options to be able to do things they want? So I always had that option. And I'm going to talk about money here as well. And, people I think can think money's crude and to talk about it. It's not. It's very, very important. One of my heroes, a guy called Jim Rohn, and he said, you should aim to be a millionaire in your life, not for the money, but for the person you will have to become in order to get there. When I started this business and realized that this could be the one that gets me there, I was always asking the question of myself, Stuart, is who do I now need to become? Because in order to have what you want to have, you have to do certain things, but you can only do certain things when you become a certain person.
Yeah.
And so at every stage, who is the person I'm going to have to be to scale this business with fierce competition, who've had $24 million of investment in a space, and we've got in a space where nobody knows who I am. And Robert Craven on this call spoke to me when he first knew what I was doing. He says, why are you doing it in the accounting industry? Like, no one knows you. It's a difficult industry. You're from outside of it. You know, this is going to be a challenge. And so we were up against it in this space. So I had to become someone to gain traction in it. Then I had to become someone to adopt financial disciplines and rigor that Paul helped me with. I had to become a focused person. Then I had to become someone else to back out of the business and then someone else to sell it. So I was constantly thinking about that. But the turning point when we started to realize that this could be the vehicle that gets me to that point that I've always thought of was Paul got me to go and do a financial planning exercise with a guy called Adam Carolan at the time of Zentum. And we put together a plan, my wife and I, and this aligned me and my wife. For years, Stuart, I've been kind of trying to do business ventures. My wife was always pissed off at me because I'm working ridiculous hours and she never understands where she's going. She was in a very tough job. We got together on the same page and said, right, what's important to us in life? Where are we going to get to? What is this valuation that we want to be able to sell at that point? And then once we'd established that and agreed what was important to us, Paul then built the financial systems and processes and governance and disciplines. He assembled a team through MAP and dropped that finance function into GoProposal to ensure that we were on track for it. Every decision that we were making, every budget, every forecast, every set of management accounts was, this is where we're getting to, and are we on track to get there? And there were many times when Paul would be like, right, we're doing the budget for this year, James. How many clients do we want at the end of the year? And I'm like, 1,000. Why 1,000, James? It's 1,000, isn't it? When it's 1,000. He's like, yeah, but it don't mean anything. It's like, where are we actually trying to get to? What's the revenue that you and Becky need so that she can leave her job, so that you can buy that house near the kids' school and you can get the things that you want? What's the amount that you both need? This amount. Okay, well, let's put some numbers in. Okay, you need 462 clients this year, James. That's the goal. Okay, that actually means something. That's going to show up in your life. That's going to make a difference. So we always had once we'd set the financial plan, Stuart, we knew where we're going and we knew at the point we would exit. We didn't fully know. We had some guesses around what level of revenue we'd need to get to be able to generate that level of valuation, but there was a lot of unknowns and uncertainty to it. And it was last year, we started to get some serious interest and people started to put some numbers on the table. And those numbers were in the ballpark or slightly ahead of what our goals were. And that piqued my attention. And we had lots of calls and conversations and it came to nothing. Yeah. And then a few weeks later, someone else came. And all of a sudden made me think, is this now the time? And that came to nothing as well. But I think the trigger, Stuart, I think the key point was the fact that we tipped over £1 million in revenue. So £1 million in revenue is kind of a key milestone, I think, to aim for, because at that point, you've proven so much. If you've got to this point of 84K of monthly recurring revenue, you have had to demonstrate certain things to be at that point and to be a profitable business. You have achieved certain things. So it's at that point that the other software companies started to look at us. We had, like I say, a bit of attention. The numbers are in the right area, enough to make me think we're going to go for this. And it was in February of this year that I engaged an M&A company to say, my analogy was like, I don't know where I got this analogy from, but it was like, you want to go to the prom. And it was like a couple of people had turned up and said, would you like to go to the prom with me? Oh, no, we're not bothered. Oh, do you want to go to the prom? No, we're not bothered. And it was like, look, let's just get our best suit on. Let's get dressed up. We came to go to the prom. That was one of the goals that we came. Let's see. This was the question, Stuart. Let's see if now's the right time. Let's put our best suit on. Let's engage an M&A company. Let's give it our best shot now. And because it was just an option at the time. And if it's not right now, you know what? We'll knuckle back down, crack on for another 18 months, 2 years, and we'll go again. But let's just see if now is the right time. Okay,
interesting. So, Paul, then talk us through the process that you took. So, I'm going to use a phrase, take a business to market. I know it's not everybody's preferred phrase, but it's a phrase that I would hope most people would recognize. So what kind of process did you run?
Yeah, good question. So I think this is a bit of a sort of dark art, and people don't necessarily understand what happens when you actually take a business to market and what that looks like. And the reality is it's an incredibly, if you do it right, it's a long, thorough process that takes a lot of time and energy. away from running your business, which, as James said, we had to make sure that we had built a business in the first place that could afford pulling James in particular away from that business to invest that time to do it properly, so that you're better doing it properly and spending lots of time than half-heartedly doing it and completely wasting your time. So it was done with both feet in, and a lot of preparation before there was anything that even looked like marketing or approaching any prospective buyers. A lot of conversations about what we wanted it to look like and what we wanted from a sale. A lot of under the bonnet stuff in terms of really digging deep into the data over the 5 years and really interrogating the data, which obviously, because of the way that we had built everything within Xero, we had coded everything in such a way that we knew that we'd be able to answer those questions. And even then it's draining, even then it takes a lot of work. And then you're questioning all the patterns and the trends over the years, the peaks and troughs, and going back and thinking, you're basically thinking about all the questions that a buyer is going to ask and having all that prepared in what we call a data room in advance. So you're building it and building it and building it so that by the time anyone else asks questions, you can be really forthcoming. And that really impressed the buyers when we were able to provide that information. And they made the comment, James will remind me in a minute what they said, but that effectively they had seen much larger, longer established companies that weren't able to produce information as quickly as we did. Is that right, James?
Yeah.
So there's loads of work that goes on just to prepare for that. It was like a big day, it had been several months of work before we pressed the button to say, we're now going to make this not public, by the way. You do a very simple one-page flyer to express that you have a business in an industry with these kinds of numbers that you are interested in selling. So it's fairly vague. You're certainly not giving away the name of the company at that point. It takes a lot of work to produce that one simple page. And then we sent that out to the businesses that we felt could be a good strategic fit, both for the acquirer and for us as the selling party as well. So we shortlisted those businesses, sent a flyer out, and then we effectively had a spreadsheet that we maintained to say, what has the comeback been? Has it been a yes, we're interested, no, we're not, or we'd like to see more information? And then at that stage, we look at it. Those that have shown interest, if we're interested in progressing, we do non-disclosure agreement, and then we provide them with a more in-depth IM information memorandum with more information on the company. But again, we were able to turn that around quickly because we already had it. Whereas, if you start just having casual coffees and prospecting with potential buyers and you've not got all that information, it won't look credible. And they will sense, as James said earlier, maybe that desperation as opposed to being a polished business that's gone through a process. So then we provide the IM documents to those that are more interested. And then if they're still interested after that stage, then we start to open discussions, and then we start to check that, first and foremost, there's a culture fit, and you have several meetings to understand what a transaction might look like. And it's, significantly further down the line before you even start to talk about valuations. And then you get to a point where you're negotiating heads of terms on a valuation that you're happy with. Then the hard work starts. Then that's when it really ramps up after that stage, because once you've agreed valuation, you've agreed heads of terms, that's when you go deep into the due diligence. So James, like if you had to add up how many questions over all those checklists from all those parties you had to answer over those months, what would that look like?
It was unreal. And I think just to expand on some of the things that you've said there, Paul, in terms of the preparation for this, Stuart, for us to get to this point, it started 5 years ago. That's the reality. Like if we'd have got to the start of this year and thought we're now preparing this business to sell, let's put everything in place, we'd have been stuffed. You could not have been done. Okay. So everything that we had got in place. And this was something I've been banging on about for so long. The level of investment we've made into the finance function of our business has always been around 3% of our revenue into that finance function. So by the end, we're spending 5-6 grand a month. And I speak to people and they say, we turn over this much and we're not spending any of that. And I think, yeah, if you ever considered selling your business, you would have zero chance of getting through that process. Zero, could not be done. So we started out, you can't start your prep 6 months before. It has to start years before, 3. And if you're not ready now, it's going to take you 3 years to get everything in place, right? So we had everything in place. But then we engaged an M&A company called Shaw & Co, who were brilliant. And they worked very closely with Matt throughout the process. But they said this really interesting thing. They said, look, when we get to a deal and the due diligence, if it's with a large PLC, the likelihood is they're going to bring in a top 4 accountancy firm, okay? And when they come in, they're going to want to earn their money. They are going to want to rack up the most number of hours possible, looking at absolutely everything. We need to ensure that they can't do that because we have all the answers and everything is absolutely cast iron. Now, thankfully, with our business, there was no skeletons in the cupboard. There was nothing that we were trying to hide. We wanted to present everything, as best as possible. But the governance, the financial governance of a business for us to be able to scale is one thing. And Matt did an incredible job to get us to do that. The financial governance required by a large PLC, FTSE 100, that has to report to the market their numbers is a whole other level, right? And so what we had to do throughout that, from February, we started this process to be able to get everything in shape before we even took it to market, did the IM, then do management presentations. And then I always remember the stress. I was not involved in the business at all. So when I say you have to be able to build a business that you're not involved with, if you're involved operationally in that business, you can't enter this process because I was not present mentally or emotionally or physically to have any operational impact on that business. And members of the team were not able to as well throughout the process. So the depth was crazy, the amount of hours. It was a full-time gig for me to be able to do this, right? And what Paul then said to answer his question was, I always remember we got to the point where we'd agreed heads of terms and we now enter into exclusivity with one company. And Daisy of Shaw & Co rang me and says, now the hard work starts. I'm like, are you joking? Like, it's been hard work. She says, no, you're going to see what hard work is now. We had answered hundreds and hundreds of questions. From that point, the last 3 months, we would have answered over 1,000 questions from lawyers, from technical experts, from tax experts, from top 4 accountancy firm. And some of those questions warranted 40-page answers. Yeah. The depth was absolutely crazy.
I think when you come to this and Paul, you can give me your view in a minute in terms of the due diligence process. I've been involved in ones before and they can be very different. And I think one of the things, going back to John's question, was, yes, have a view, and not only a view of your acquirers, have an understanding, think like that acquirer. What is their kind of process? What lots of small businesses do is they aspire to sell to a larger business, and then you may walk into a room and there are more people and there are more grey suits in that room than members of staff in your business.
Yeah. And
we forget that, as an agency, it tends to be a number of creatives or a number of delivery people, and they have to do this then over and above their normal day job, whereas the acquirer brings a team in and that's all they've got to do.
Yeah.
And it is something you do need to learn really and understand and be ready for. So what was your view, Paul, on the sort of due diligence process? And I've sold a number of businesses, never sold to a FTSE 100 business. Give us a flavour of what the process was and what was the involvement from yourselves?
So in the end, there was actually 2 of the world's biggest 4 professional service firms engaged by Sage to do the due diligence, not just one. So there was 2 of them.
Oh, you're not including MAP in that then?
No, we're not one of the biggest 4 yet. No, number 5. They were involved from a financial and a legal due diligence. And as James says, that they would have specific people with a specific area. So like, I remember Abasina, who works for us, coming off the back of a technical conversation. with the tax team, the tax due diligence team, and he said there was 17 people on that meeting.
Yes.
He said, I said, how many questions were there? He said 17. He said there was a person per question. So they were going into specific lines on specific employment contracts and specific commercial contracts. So that old phrase of what got you here won't get you there is so relevant. And when we talk about James saying about going back 3 years ago, you need to start, to build a business, you need to have a level of a risk appetite. You need to have a level of bravery. And so some of the things that you might sort of rush to get employees in the door or sign commercial terms with a client, everything's going to was gone through with a real fine tooth comb. We're selling to such a big company. So it was every employment contract, it was every commercial contract, and every line within each of those. James would be on back-to-back 4-hour meetings going through line by line of 70-odd page documents. It was absolutely brutal. I've never seen anything like it. I must admit, there were times I actually felt sorry for Sage to think, what must you be paying for all of this? I think James messaged me one night and said there's 74 people in a Google Doc at once looking at this.
In the data room from one company.
In the data room and just go in meetings and obviously everything's been done remotely, and just all these faces appearing from all these different companies, all asking you questions and putting scrutiny on you. And I remember being in one where they were quizzing me as the finance lead of GoProposal, if you like, on trends from like 3 years ago. So they wanted to know why the subscription revenue dipped for a month 36 months ago.
Yeah.
So
from one month to the next, specifically from like, why in April 2019 did subscriptions go from there to there? Why did the profit by 0.5% move? And you're like you need the narrative, you need the backup and the data to give you the answer.
Yeah. So as James said, doing that retrospectively would just be impossible. We had to refer back to the board meeting that we had 3 years ago that had the management accounts and the forecast and the minutes to say why with what's happened that month, and is it a concern or is it expected? What is it that we're doing about it? What is it a symptom of? And as you said, Stuart, that is their job. Their job is financial analysts. A small business, you don't have a financial analyst looking at that degree, and they understand that to a degree. But they are, if they're a PLC, a large company, they are going to grill you on it, and they do want to find an answer. So the more clean and ready for that process you can be, the more you give yourself a chance of actually finding the answer. Because I didn't know the answer off the top of my head. I said, I can answer that question for you, no problem. Let me go back 3 years ago and check. I don't remember every month and every event of the last 3 years, but we have documented it.
Okay, I think there's a few things there. One, which is there's been a question been asked that says, do we think that this is applicable to every deal? And is it because we've mentioned the FTSE 100? Is that make it so specific? And whilst most sales won't be a stroll, as the phrase that John is using, would a smaller company be less rigor? I think having done that from very small and to bigger deals, I think the point is, at the end of the day, you are asking a professional to underwrite something, be that the lawyer, be that the accountant, and therefore they have to have the rigor. And very often you can do a very small deal and the rigor appears to be greater, because ultimately there is the comeback on the professional service providers in the middle. Yeah. Also, very often in my own experience, this is why I'm a fan of having that that history, whether that you choose to a data vault or you just choose to have your records there, is that very often asking those questions is also testing your governance and your rigor. And if you can come back to, let me pull out the meeting minutes of September 2014, it's not necessarily the answer they want. It's the fact that they want to know you've done it. And this hasn't just, to use James's phrase, become an overnight success. Because ultimately they are buying that business as the operation. Yes, they want the team and they want lots of those things, but they want to see that rigor exists. And I think that's something that, particularly in the tech space, people think it's all about the product. It's all about the, you know, the image, the brand, everything else. And whilst that can increase your multiple, I would suggest that it's the rigor behind it, because ultimately somebody in a grey pinstripe suit has to sign that off. And that's what you have to,
it's all about risk.
Yeah.
People think that you get to that stage and what you're trying to do is spruce your company up to show all the opportunity and all the growth that may or may not happen in the future, and why this is the best thing since sliced bread. They've already seen enough of that.
Yeah.
That's why they're talking to you. That's why they're signing an NDA. That's why they've done head to turn. Once you're in the due diligence, everything is about what are the risks. We're going to analyze every potential risk of this company going backwards. It's not. It's less about the future potential, and it's more about what are the risks of us not maintaining what we've built today.
I think that may also just answer Liam's question, which is very often the due diligence can be seen as a discounting exercise by an acquirer. And again, without going into any specifics of this deal, that the process chosen to say, no, we'll have heads of terms agreed first, does tend to mitigate against that and secure the valuation, but that also just brings extra pressure on the due diligence. That the due diligence is there to underline and exhibit that value is put together on solid foundations, really. So hopefully that answers Liam's question as well.
Let's answer a couple of bits on there, Stu, and to your point. So we had spent, you know, very early on in the business putting everything in place to be able to get to this point so we could attract the highest valuation we possibly could. So we have playbooks in place for absolutely every single process. We've automated as much as we can. We're a lean team. We're profitable, strong financial governance, strong metrics, all these things that we've done. Great value in the market, great brand recognition, still huge opportunity. You know, people say you should sell the business on the down, like on a golf swing, like when there's still so much upward trajectory ahead of it, which is exactly where we'd got to. And so I can't go into the details of the commercial structure or anything behind the deal, other than to say we got a strong valuation of the business. I think that's enough to say. But throughout this process, because we had that, then it's Sage's obligation to their shareholders to ensure that what they're buying is exactly what they think it is. You know, they have to go through line by line to understand that, because, you know, it's not a small chunk of change they're paying for it. And all I will say is that the entire process is, it always felt that they were on our side. So even though it was very rigorous and like on it, they were very much on our side. We had very personal conversations with them. The M&A guy that led it, a guy called Keith on their team, we developed a really close relationship throughout it. He led and drove it. He rang me yesterday personally, and I'm thinking, what does he want? Like, was there something wrong with the deal? Like, what's he want from me? Like, and he said, I'm just ringing to see how you are. I'm hearing great things. I'm hearing it's landing well. You're doing great. I just want to know how you are and what car have you bought, and like just really friendly. And always, this is the thing that I want to get over. You know, we spent a long time making sure that Sage were the right fit for us, for our product, for our clients, for our team. And we put them under due diligence. We did our due diligence on them. We spoke to their C-level team. We spoke to many, many people. We spoke to companies that had sold to them in the past. I wanted to speak to founders that had sold to them and understand their journey and what life was like for them now. So we did our part as well, but everyone was driving towards the same outcome.
The other thing as well, sorry, Stuart, just to quickly add, is that, you know, we're not pretending that everything was 100% perfect and that every stone they overturned, there was no issues at all. What Sage were really great at is they would understand that there were going to be some things that need fixing, and they'd give us time, wouldn't you, James, to go and deal with those issues. So there were certain things that maybe weren't quite in place, but they weren't just using that to bash us down on the valuation. No. They were using it to say, here's some risk matters that we would like to be concluded before we complete. So we were working together as a team. And I think if you're going to do this, you have to actually enjoy the process. Like, as hard as it was and as mentally draining as it was, you actually have to enjoy. And James loves fixing problems. You know, we're just waiting for the next problem. When it appears, we're not just going to cave in and, you know, stress out over it. We're going to use it. Say, okay, there's the next problem to fix, and there's the next problem to fix. You've got to be ready for that. You've got to be mentally resilient, and in a sick way, almost look forward to it as well.
I also think that you know, it's important to understand there that, again, because of the process that you followed, and by getting the preferred bidder status in, and then getting the heads done and getting the exclusivity. I think what lots of selling entrepreneurs sometimes forget is the commitment from the acquirer at that stage. They have actually made significant commitment at that stage already. The fact that more then comes in, and you say 72 people appear on a call or whatever that number is, it is at that stage something that everyone wants to see through. And there's a question been asked by Stephen that says, did we almost shoot ourselves in the foot? Is it because we had such well-prepared documents and numbers that the auditors dug deeper? You can answer that yourselves, but having been there myself and done it before, it's the fact that what it does is it allows them to feel confident, and also it's sometimes go back to James's putting your best suit on. It's actually showing it out there and saying, you know what, and this is what we've recognized you might want to look at. And again, it just brings that that level of seriousness and I'm going to use the phrase gravitas to a smaller business when they're being acquired by somebody like that. So
the reality is, Steve, as much as I'd like to show off and say it's because we had the information right, again, Sager PLC, they've done this time and time and time again. They have extremely onerous requirements on them as a PLC in terms of the process that they needed to go through. So they had to work through that process, whether we're little GoProposal or we're, multi-billion pound company, which we are not. They have to go through the same rigor because they're listed on the stock exchange and they have requirements that they need to fulfill. And some of the questions James will explain felt not well considered because they didn't feel relevant to the nature of business that we are, but they have to go through their process every single time, no stone unturned, regardless of how big you are as a company, what industry you're in, what information you've got available. You have to go through that. So again, you need to be ready for that. You can't be getting stressed about why they're asking this question and why is there so many people in this meeting. They're doing their job. They're there to do that, and you've got to work with them and feel, as Stuart Wright said, feel like you're on the right team, because at this point you all want to get this deal through, and you've got to see that you're working together.
I remember one point, I've got my kid, it's like you be kept, we kept this information very tight to us as a family, but my little boy, well, he's 11, very interested in the process and business and stuff, so he knew what was going on, he knew the numbers and all this type of stuff. And I remember one morning he'd come down, I was waking up at 4:30 every day for the last 4 months. For halfway through this process, 4:30 was my new wake up time. Couldn't wake up any time after that. In the last week, it was 3:30. On the last day, it was 2:30 when I woke up. So one morning, it's 4:30. I was sat on my head in my hands, and my son wakes up early anyway. He's like up at 5 o'clock. And he come downstairs, says, "What's up, Daddy?" I says, "I've just had another load of questions, another 100 questions we've got to answer this week." And he went, "The thing is, Daddy, they are paying a lot of money for this. So why don't you just get on with it?" And I was like, "Yeah, fair enough, I will." So that it's like you just need to keep in check sometimes. And Leo was very helpful there. But just a couple of points there is that the valuation that we're offered in the heads of terms that we got that deal at the end. Nothing was discounted. It was never even a question. And to Paul's point, there's so many stages in the process where it could fall over at this point. Like they're coming to you and saying, "Well, this is what we found wrong with the app. These are the security issues. These are the technical issues. They need fixing. But we'll work with you to fix them. This is the report. This is why they need fixing." And we were on it, and we were very positive about that when they brought these things to us. You've got to be positive. You can't become defensive. When they say, "This is what's wrong with your app," you have to say, "You are the experts," because you know what? They are. And if there are security issues, get them fixed. Like you need to do it. So you have to engage with this very, very positively. But something I will say here that people don't consider in this process, and why our finances that Paul, and the MAP team had put in place, and we were able to engage the MAP team in this process as well, is because as well as them doing due diligence to say, is what you've got, is what you've given us, what we expect effectively for us to buy. That's what they're trying to do. They're also trying to build a business case on the other side of this, right? So they're presenting this to their board to say, this is what the business case is. So to Garrett's question, this is what the growth is going to be on the other side of this. So they need those numbers and that continuity of numbers to be able to build that case. Now, because we were unusual as a business in that our team knew we were selling. They didn't know who we were selling to, but they knew we were going through the process. We engaged them throughout the journey. But as we got closer to the end, we had to invite people in. They had to know who Sage were. We did have to take some team members to the Shard. But I was able to take, Jack, Heather, and Morgan, and we sat in the Shard, and we sat with their team now this is like within a month of closing the deal, building out their business case, building out projections and models, and what type of growth it's going to be, and how many more staff are we going to need to employ, and what that growth is going to look like. That's a really exciting part of the journey that you don't consider. And if you're going through this, when you're speaking to potential acquirers, a great question to ask them in the process is, what is your business case for our company on the other side of this? Because the more that you can know about that, the more you can speak into it and actually help them to shape it up as well. So just think about that due diligence part. It's not only historic, but what they're trying to do, they're trying to say, is this journey true to this point? And can we now ramp it up like that on the other side?
Okay. I'm conscious about time and conscious about the fact that everyone's given us so much time today. So really just want to try and wrap up with a sort of final question, both of you really. What advice would you leave for others that maybe have an aspiration to do this and may want to sell their company? If they've not yet begun any process, what should they be thinking about first?
I would say to, like you do when you're doing marketing of your own services and your own products and services, you put yourself in the shoes of your customer. So it's no different here. This is the biggest sale you'll ever make, which isn't just one of your products or services. It's your whole company, the biggest sale you're ever going to make. So you need to think about the level that you need to put yourself in the customer's shoes, i.e. the acquirer's shoes, just like if you were doing your own marketing. And you know, on the concept of building to sell, as James said, we were a very lean company and we focused on the things that were important to us until this last year when we started to focus on things that were important to the acquirer. So we started to add data into our reporting, into our management accounts. We started to add metrics and charts to chart data that was going to be important to the potential acquirer that was coming up. So we started to look at things like, you know, revenue in different territories and people on different levels of subscriptions, and how many different additional users do people have on their app and things like that. So we started to really add more and more and more data. Were we actioning all of that data every month? No. And previously, if you weren't going to do anything with the data, you weren't going to take action, you wouldn't report on it. But we were now preparing for the future acquirer and the data that we wanted to see. So James was very good at this from a branding perspective as well, and thinking about what we were saying through social and making sure that, you know, we weren't aligning to brands that were maybe too much to brands that were competitive to our potential acquirers. But in terms of the data and the reporting that we were running as well, it was always thinking about the narrative that we wanted to build for our future acquirer. So that would be my first things, is to constantly be putting yourself in the shoes of your acquirer and not be too emotionally attached to your business. It's not going to be about you eventually. It's going to be about them and what they're going to buy. And if they're going to spend a lot of their hard-earned money on your business, then you need to be ready and relevant and attractive to them. And then the second point I would say is to be clear, and this is what I think a lot of people, and you talk about this a lot, Stuart, struggle with, is what are you going to do after you sell the business?
Yeah.
Now, for James, that means actually not that much change in terms of he's doing the same role for the same company. He's just got a lot more resources and a lot more governance over him because he's now an employee. But he is still effectively the CEO of GoProposal. But for others, you know, it might be that you're no longer going to be involved from that company. And even if you are, at one day that is going to come to an end. So even if post-transaction you're still involved, one day that's going to come to an end. And you know, James got asked that question just before he was about to sign the final documents. Are you sure this is right for you? Be clear about what your future looks like. Your business is an asset that you are building and growing, and eventually you will exit from, either during life or during death. So what's the thing that you're going to do once that business is no longer the thing taking up all your time and energy?
I think that's, as I say, we do probably need to conclude, but there's been another question answered there by Steve that's talking about the Delivering Happiness book. Having gone through that personally, and I've been very open and honest in previous discussions that said, you know, the first time I sold a business of a life-changing scale, you do all the ticking boxes that you think you want, but then it's very different afterwards. And I've been very say open that, I found that very difficult, and the sort of 9 months after found difficult. So again, it's part of James's view on options, which is, well, does an exit mean that's it, and tomorrow you're not involved anymore? And sometimes the right acquirer is the person who is going to keep you involved in that business for a period of time. And yes, it may come out over time, but the specific question Steve is asking, James, if you just maybe finish up on that, is, how do you stay motivated now to continue working at the level you got to? You made the point, which I've said before, which is, to be a successful entrepreneur, you've often got to live your life how most people won't for a few years, to then be able to live it like most people can't. So you said you got yourself into that frame of mind. I would suggest now it's probably a different frame of mind. Yeah,
definitely. Just to answer your first question, Stuart, and I'll be very quick, so I'm conscious of time and I've got a train to catch myself. But in terms of advice to people, you have to get to a point where the business runs without you. You have to get to a point where it's got all the financial governance in place, legal governance, processes, systems, great team, great culture. That is non-negotiable. People think that, I want to be successful because I want all these choices. You don't have many choices if you want to be successful. It's really boring. You've got to do these like 10 things. They are not negotiable. You have to do them. And so I couldn't have entered this process. If you think about it, from February to September, how many months is that? For 8 months of being completely, emotionally, physically unavailable for any operational aspect of the business, and significant members of the team, in some stages, quarter of the team not involved. And this is the thing as well, right up until September, they were asking for August's figures. They still want to see growth in August. Like, you can't, nothing can slow down. Yeah. Like, you're not just running the business, it's got to continue to grow throughout that time. So you've got to get to that point as fast as possible, whether you want to sell or not. In terms of on the other side of this, the reality is that if you get this right and you've got good people around you, and I've had a great team around me, financial experts, I've had MAP team, I've had great financial planners, tax advisors, and I have now assembled my team on the other side of this as well, financial planners, tax advisors, various other things to help me through this. The reality is if you do this right, nothing that much changes. Like, you still speak to your values. Like I was saying to Becky, what should we do now? Should we go skiing? Just go skiing. Just Scarlett hates the cold. Leo don't like being active, and you can't balance. What do I want to go skiing for? We love going to Norfolk. So let's keep doing that. We'll drive there in a nicer car. We'll stay in a better Airbnb, but we're going to do the things that we've always loved doing. And that's it. So people see that you've got this huge chunk of cash or whatever it is, and in their mind, they've seen other people, be extravagant or whatever. I got new socks in my sock drawer. The next day I ordered all new socks. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you get this right, it just allows you to remove money as being the problem in your life. But the reality is it doesn't significantly change things. It means you can help more people. It means you can relieve some burdens and financial pressures of people close to you. You can be a good force in the world. You can do good things. It's given me an opportunity now. We've had great impact in the accounting industry. I've got a bigger audience now. I'm gonna have a bigger impact in the accounting industry. So it's given me a new platform. And Paul, has always championed me and wanted me to get to that point, and has really helped me to be focused. When I first met him, he said, I don't understand how you're not a millionaire yet. I said, I know, it's doing my head in as well. He says, you're either full of shit and there's something I've not spotted about you yet, or you've not been focused for long enough. And Paul has helped me to be focused. And there's this one question that we've had, and you've kept me on it as well, Stuart, over the years. And I thank you as well for your guidance and counsel. Is just because you can do something, don't mean say you should do something. Is this thing you're about to do now going to get you towards the thing that you want? And if it doesn't, why are you doing it? And get the people around you who can help to keep you on that track and pick you up when you drop. That's what you need, the best team around you.
Excellent. Well, listen, on that point, I think that's a great point to close. So I do hope that the time spent today from everyone maybe gives them some insight and some support. There's been some very positive comments. Thank you. The webinar is recorded, and we will send it out to all the participants over the next few days via email, because obviously as soon as we go past the hour, some people have not caught the last few minutes. So obviously from my side, thank you to everybody who's given us time today. Hope that has been useful. As we said, hopefully it would at the start. And obviously thanks to Paul and thanks to James.
Thanks, Stuart. Cheers, pal. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Bye.